TIFU by trying to impress my boss and nearly setting my office on fire. So, here's the thing, I've only been at my new job for a few months, and I've been trying really hard to make a good impression. My boss, let's call him Greg, is a guy who values initiative and creativity, and I've heard through the grapevine that he's all about people who take risks and stand out. So naturally, I've been busting my ass to do just that. It hasn't been easy, but I've been doing okay so far, and I was hoping to finally show him I'm someone who can think outside the box. One morning, I was in the office kitchen, scrolling through my phone on my lunch break when I stumbled upon this brilliant idea for a team-building activity. It was one of those out-of-the-box things that I thought Greg would love. A bit quirky, a bit edgy, and it definitely wasn't something any other department would try. It was something I found on Pinterest, involving flaming cocktails and a bit of a science experiment vibe. So, naturally, I thought it was perfect. I'm a big fan of cooking and creating fun experiences, so I started to imagine what it would look like, a fun, hands-on team-building exercise involving fire. What could go wrong? Fire is cool, right? It's dynamic and exciting, and everyone loves a good spectacle. Plus, it seemed like it would break the ice and bond the team in a way nothing else could. I spent the next couple of hours carefully planning the activity. The idea was to create a flaming drink, like a proper bartender would do at a high-end bar, except for our office. We could do it during our weekly Friday afternoon meeting, that seemed like the best time to get everyone together and loosen up, right? I even figured I could make it a learning experience by throwing in some science of fire for good measure. By Thursday, I had everything ready, a selection of flammable spirits, some safety precautions I thought would suffice. I didn't bother telling anyone about the plan beforehand because I thought it would be more exciting as a surprise, and even a fire extinguisher tucked away in a corner just in case. I was feeling pretty confident about it. I thought, if this goes well, Greg will be so impressed by my creativity and boldness. Maybe even a promotion or at least a high five. I could already hear him saying, "I didn't know you had this kind of innovative spirit, / insert name here." Come Friday afternoon, I was all set. Everyone in the office was gathered in the conference room for our usual weekly meeting, and I had arranged everything to make it look like a fun break from the routine. I pulled out the ingredients and a small portable bar setup I'd hidden away in the corner. Greg looked at me, eyebrows raised, but gave me the nod to go ahead. This was it. The moment that would define my office career. I started with the first drink, the one that would really showcase my skills. The plan was to pour some rum, light it on fire, and then quickly add it to the cocktail. For added effect, I was going to do a big reveal when the flame shot up, impressing everyone with my flair and fire handling abilities. But here's where things took a turn for the worse. I didn't realize how much alcohol was actually in the drink. As I poured the rum into the glass, the flame from the lighter I was holding grew bigger and bigger, way bigger than I expected. I wasn't sure whether it was the amount of alcohol or the angle I was holding the bottle at, but before I knew it, the flame jumped out of the glass and started licking the edges of the table. I panicked. This was not the controlled, cool moment I had envisioned. I'd read about how to handle fire in cooking classes, but it's different when you're actually standing in front of a crowd of coworkers, all staring at you, and the fire's starting to spread across the table. Everyone was frozen for a moment. Then, the panic kicked in. People started shouting, "Put it out! Fire extinguisher!" Greg was suddenly on his feet, looking like he was about to either have a heart attack or fire me on the spot. I tried to grab the fire extinguisher that I'd put in the corner, but I was so flustered that I couldn't even figure out how to use it. Finally, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a pitcher of water that had been sitting on the counter for the meeting. It was the worst decision I could have made, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I tossed it at the flames, and of course, water and fire don't mix well. The flames exploded higher, and now it wasn't just the table that was on fire. The curtains were starting to catch, the office plants were starting to smoke, and the flames were spreading like a wildfire. In my panic, I ran out of the room, yelling for help. My coworkers were running around, trying to help in their own way, some calling 911, others attempting to smother the flames with office chairs. I don't even know how long it took for someone to grab the proper extinguisher and put out the fire. All I know is, it was a damn mess. When the smoke finally cleared, the office looked like a war zone. The kitchen was completely scorched, the conference room table was charred beyond recognition, and there were burn marks on the walls. The fire department arrived shortly after, and I had to spend the next few hours explaining everything to them, my coworkers, and then, of course, Greg. To make matters worse, Greg wasn't angry in the way I thought he'd be. He was worse. He was disappointed. He told me that while he appreciated my initiative, what I had done was irresponsible, dangerous, and completely unprofessional. He said he had hoped I would think things through more carefully before executing an idea like this. My colleagues were a mix of amused and horrified, and I was the one who had to clean up the mess. In the end, I learned a few things the hard way. First, never bring fire into the office, especially if you have no experience handling it. Second, sometimes the out-of-the-box ideas are best left to professionals who know what they're doing. And third, impressing your boss by doing something risky is a terrible idea if it involves setting things on fire. Needless to say, I'm now the office cautionary tale, and I'm fairly certain Greg will never look at me the same way again. Oh, and I'm still paying for the damage to the office furniture. I'm going to stick to safer ways to stand out at work from now on, like actually being good at my job instead of trying to pull off stunt-like activities. Lesson learned. No more fire, no more risky stunts, and definitely no more surprises. I'll just stick to being boring for the time being. TLDR, tried to impress my boss with a flaming cocktail team-building activity in the office. Set the office on fire. Got called irresponsible and unprofessional. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally turning my best friend's wedding into a disaster. I've never been the best at navigating social situations, but I've always tried to be a good friend. That was until last weekend when I completely derailed my best friend's wedding. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I say it was a disaster, but the combination of poor timing, my lack of understanding about certain social norms, and a lot of awkwardness made it one of the most mortifying days of my life. Let me give you some context. My best friend, Sarah, and I have known each other since we were kids. We were inseparable growing up, and even though we went to different colleges, we always stayed close. When she got engaged, I was over the moon for her. She and her fiancé, Tom, are perfect for each other. Their wedding day was something I had been looking forward to for months, and I was honored to be asked to be one of the bridesmaids. It was supposed to be a perfect day. Now, I should probably mention that I'm not great with formal events. I'm more of a laid-back kind of person, and I don't always fully grasp the magnitude of certain traditions. I assumed that I could get through the day with a little bit of prep, but I quickly realized that was not the case. The day of the wedding started off like any other, nervous energy, last-minute preparations, and trying to get everyone ready on time. The ceremony was going smoothly, everyone was dressed to the nines, and I was doing my best to keep my nerves in check. But the moment I stepped into the church, everything started to spiral. It all started with the bouquet toss. Now, I had seen it in movies and knew the basic premise: the bride tosses the bouquet, and whoever catches it is supposedly next in line to get married. It seemed simple enough. But I didn't realize how high stakes it would be for the other women at the wedding. You see, Sarah's sister, Emily, had been engaged before and had a pretty bitter breakup. She was the most competitive person I knew, and I didn't realize how much this moment meant to her. When Sarah tossed the bouquet into the air, it was like the entire room froze. I saw Emily's eyes lock onto it with a fire that I've never seen before. I don't know if it was the tension in the air or just pure instinct, but I launched myself into the air like a football player going for a touchdown. In my mind, I was just trying to catch it to be supportive and go with the flow. But as I reached out for the bouquet, Emily lunged forward at the exact same time. Instead of a graceful, competitive tug-of-war over the flowers, I ended up colliding with Emily mid-air. We both went tumbling to the floor in front of the entire wedding party. It was like a slow-motion moment, people gasping, the bouquet slipping from our grasp, and us both looking like a pair of clumsy fools. To make matters worse, the high heels I was wearing, which I had never worn before, decided that they didn't want to cooperate with me. I slipped on the polished floor and landed on Emily's foot. I don't know how, but I managed to make it worse by knocking over a decorative flower arrangement that had been carefully placed on the altar. It crashed to the floor with a thunderous sound that echoed through the church, causing a few people in the crowd to gasp. There was an uncomfortable silence for a moment, and then the laughter started. The entire wedding party started laughing, including Sarah and Tom. At first, it seemed like a nervous laugh, but soon everyone was laughing so hard that it felt like I had just become the punchline to a very long-running joke. I was mortified. I felt my face turn bright red, and I just wanted to sink into the ground. But it wasn't over. After the bouquet toss, things only got worse. The reception was beautiful, and I was trying my best to recover from the earlier disaster. I spent some time with other bridesmaids, chatting and trying to act like everything was fine, but my mind was racing. I was thinking, I have to do something to make up for that moment. I need to redeem myself. And that's when I made another huge mistake. As the night went on, the DJ started playing the first dance songs. It was magical, Sarah and Tom twirling around the dance floor, looking so happy. Everyone was in awe watching them, and I thought, why not surprise them and join in on the fun? So, without thinking, I grabbed my glass of champagne and made my way to the dance floor. But instead of joining in with a graceful step, I ended up tripping over my own feet and spilling my drink all over Sarah's dress. I swear, it was like time stood still. Sarah's eyes widened, and I saw her mouth move, but I couldn't hear anything over the pounding in my ears. Her pristine, white dress was now stained with champagne, and I was standing there like a deer caught in headlights, holding an empty glass in my hand. Everyone in the room stared at me, and all I could think was, what is wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? The worst part was when Sarah started to cry. It wasn't a huge breakdown, but she wiped her eyes and turned away for a moment. I had ruined her wedding dress. Of all the things that could go wrong, this was the one thing I never imagined happening. I was supposed to be the one who had her back, not the one who caused more problems. In an attempt to make it right, I rushed to the bathroom to get some water and a towel. But as I passed through the hallway, I accidentally bumped into a waiter who was carrying a tray full of hors d'oeuvres. The tray went flying, and a bunch of mini quiches rained down onto the floor. I had to just stand there and stare in disbelief as the tiny appetizers rolled around on the ground. At this point, I was on the verge of tears. I had officially become the walking disaster at my best friend's wedding, and no matter what I did, it felt like I couldn't fix anything. Sarah eventually came over to me, took a deep breath, and gave me a hug. She told me she didn't blame me, and that it was all part of the day's chaos. But I could tell that my series of mishaps had put a damper on things. The rest of the night was a blur. I tried to stay out of the way, not make any more accidental spills, and just keep my head down. But the damage had been done, and I knew I wouldn't be able to live this down for a long time. Sarah and Tom ended up going on their honeymoon the next day, and while Sarah was kind enough not to bring up the incident, I could see that it weighed heavily on me. I'm still embarrassed, and I've apologized countless times, but I'm not sure how I'll ever make it up to her. I guess I just learned the hard way that I need to be more mindful at formal events. I may never be able to show my face in front of those wedding guests again, but at least I know not to attempt to catch a bouquet like a linebacker and to keep my clumsy self away from the dance floor. TLDR, I ruined my best friend's wedding by tripping over my own feet during the bouquet toss, spilling champagne on the bride's dress, and knocking over an entire tray of appetizers. TIFU by accidentally texting my boss a picture of but it all started as a typical Monday morning. I was in the middle of a pretty busy week at work, and like most Mondays, I was feeling the weight of it all. I had barely gotten any sleep over the weekend because I was too busy binge-watching a new show and then texting back and forth with a friend who had recently moved to a different city. So by Monday, my brain was practically on autopilot, just trying to get through the day without making any huge mistakes. I work in a fairly casual office environment, and we use Slack to communicate with each other throughout the day. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone while sipping on my overpriced coffee, and I noticed a message from my boss. It wasn't an unusual occurrence. My boss is generally very communicative and likes to keep up with the team. He had sent me a simple message: "Hey, I need the updated figures for last quarter. Can you send them over?" Now, I should mention that I had been working on the report for a while. It was a large data set, and it had been taking me longer than expected to finalize the numbers. But I had finally gotten it to a point where it was looking good. At that moment, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders because I was ready to send it over to him. So, I started typing a quick reply: "Sure thing, I'll get that to you in just a minute." I wanted to make sure everything was perfect, so I spent the next few minutes double-checking the numbers, running some last-minute analysis, and reviewing the formatting. My boss was known to be a stickler for detail, and I knew he wouldn't let a single error slide. The last thing I wanted was for him to catch something I missed, so I was being extra careful. Here's where things went downhill. At some point during my process, I had decided to take a quick break and send a funny picture to one of my coworkers. We'd been joking around about something that had happened the previous weekend, and I figured it would help lighten the mood. So I pulled up my photos and found the perfect one, a picture I had taken of myself in the mirror while I was getting ready for a party. It was meant to be a silly selfie, but when I looked at it again, I realized the photo was a bit, well, not appropriate. You see, in the picture, I had been trying to take a full-body shot and ended up accidentally snapping a shot of my reflection in the mirror where my jeans were slightly lower than I intended. My butt was clearly visible in the shot, and it looked like I was in the middle of adjusting myself or something. It wasn't a particularly flattering photo, but it was funny in the moment. And since I thought it was just going to a friend, I sent it without much thought. However, in the midst of this, I had also been replying to my boss. I was typing a message, working on the report, and at some point, my mind had slipped into autopilot. I switched between apps without realizing what I was doing. My phone automatically pulled up the recent apps and I didn't notice that Slack was still open in the background. I also didn't notice that the message window was still active with the conversation I'd been having with my boss. So, I made the mistake of sending the most recent photo in my gallery, without realizing it, straight to my boss. Now, you might be thinking, how could you not notice? But when you're in that kind of half-dazed, autopilot mode, it's easy to overlook things. My phone immediately showed the upload, and I quickly swiped back to the report, confident that the important task was still my priority. It wasn't until a couple of minutes later when I got the notification that my boss had responded that my heart sank. The message just said, what is this?" I froze. My mind immediately raced through 100 different scenarios. I checked my screen to see if the file I had intended to send was attached, but no, it was a photo of my butt. At that moment, I felt the most intense, soul-crushing embarrassment I've ever felt in my life. I couldn't believe it. My boss, the person I've been working with for years, the one who relied on me for professional work, had just received a very unprofessional picture of my backside. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. My brain scrambled for any possible way to fix this disaster. Should I pretend like it was an accident? Should I just apologize immediately? Should I pretend I had no idea what he was talking about? I had no idea how to handle this. I panicked and immediately typed, "I am so sorry. That was meant for a friend, not you." I hit send, but my boss was already one step ahead of me. He responded almost immediately, "Yeah, I figured it wasn't meant for me. Just, can you make sure that doesn't happen again?" Now, at this point, you might be thinking it was just a funny mishap, something I could laugh off. But it was still incredibly awkward. I couldn't just move on like nothing had happened. I wanted to crawl under my desk and never come out. I spent the rest of the day trying to bury the incident in the back of my mind. It was honestly all I could think about, but I tried to focus on my work. I worked on the report, finished the last of the analysis, and sent it over to him. I was hoping he would forget about the awkward situation and that we could just move on. But my boss had one more message for me later in the day. "By the way, the report looks good. Just, let's make sure next time you're sending the right pictures," winky face, and that was it. I couldn't tell if he was just being polite, trying to brush it off, or if he found the situation as awkward as I did. But after that, I made sure to double-check every single message I sent him and every file attached. So, yeah, TIFU by accidentally texting my boss a picture of my butt. The one mistake I'll never live down. TIFU by trying to impress my date with a homemade dinner and nearly burning down my apartment. So, here's the thing. I've always considered myself a pretty decent cook. I mean, I can whip up a mean spaghetti, stir-fry, or a decent steak if I say so myself. But the kind of cooking I usually do is the type you can make in under 30 minutes, on a single pan, with minimal ingredients. Nothing too fancy. But when I got a date with someone I've had a crush on for months, I figured it was time to step up my game. I wanted to show her I could be thoughtful, skilled, and, let's be honest, impress her with a meal that was way beyond anything I've ever attempted. Mistake number 1. We met online, and after a few weeks of messaging, we finally decided to meet up in person. I'll admit, I was nervous, but I've been on enough dates to know I could pull this off if I just played it cool. However, I knew deep down that I wanted to do something special. So, instead of just going to a restaurant like a normal person, I decided to cook for her. Yeah, great idea, right? Wrong. I spent days planning the menu. I'd go all out and make a 3-course meal, appetizer, main dish, and dessert. For the appetizer, I picked bruschetta, something simple but fancy. For the main course, I chose a medium-rare ribeye steak with a side of garlic mashed potatoes and roasted asparagus. And for dessert, I decided on a classic chocolate mousse, which I'd never made before but figured would be easy enough, especially with a recipe from a food blog that looked too good to fail. I spent the entire day shopping for ingredients, most of which I had never bought before. My local grocery store probably still wonders why a man in his 30s suddenly bought an entire rack of fancy herbs, several pounds of beef, a dozen eggs, and multiple blocks of dark chocolate. But I didn't care. This was my moment. The cooking began well enough. I set the table, got all my pots and pans out, and had everything ready to go. But the first sign that I was in over my head came when I tried to sear the steak. Now, I don't know what possessed me, but I thought I could sear it in a pan with oil, on the highest heat possible, and then put it in the oven to finish cooking. I knew it was a risky move, but I was confident in my skills. So, I threw that steak in the pan and immediately realized I was in trouble. Within seconds, my kitchen filled with the smell of burning oil and the unmistakable sound of something starting to burn. I panicked. I turned the burner down, but the smoke was already thick and overwhelming. I grabbed the steak, tossed it into the oven, and opened every window in my apartment, hoping the smoke would clear. It didn't. The more I tried to ventilate, the worse it got. By this point, my smoke detectors went off, which was just perfect timing. There I was, in a flurry of sweat, smoke, and panic, desperately waving a towel at the ceiling, trying to turn off the alarm. The apartment was filling up with smoke, and I was pretty sure my date would think I was either trying to kill her or didn't know what I was doing. But the worst part? The smoke wasn't just in the kitchen. It was everywhere. The living room, the hallway, even my bathroom. I thought I might have set the building on fire. Finally, I managed to turn off the alarm, but by then the air in my apartment was thick with the smell of burnt oil, and my ribs were sore from flailing about. But I couldn't give up yet. I was determined to salvage the dinner. I'd already invested hours into this, and there was no way I was going to let my steak be a ruined disaster. So, I turned my attention to the mashed potatoes. Everything was going well until I realized that I didn't have a potato masher. I could have sworn I had one somewhere, but I had no idea where it was. My immediate reaction was to use a fork, which turned out to be a terrible idea. I ended up mashing them into a paste-like consistency that looked more like glue than mashed potatoes. At this point, my frustration reached its peak, but I tried to convince myself that nobody would notice. Maybe, just maybe, the rest of the meal would save me. Then I remembered the asparagus. I threw them in the oven, hoping I could redeem myself with some crispy, perfectly roasted asparagus. But no. Apparently, my oven didn't like the idea of even remotely cooperating with me that evening. I set the temperature too high, and within minutes, they turned into shriveled-up sticks of charred disappointment. I had no choice but to toss them out. But still, I pressed on. I moved on to dessert, chocolate mousse. Now, this should have been the easiest part, but I messed it up, too. The recipe was simple enough: melt the chocolate, whisk the eggs, fold them together, and chill. Easy, right? Well, somehow, I ended up with a mousse that was more like a lumpy, chocolate-flavored soup. By now, the time for my date was fast approaching, and I had nothing to serve but a burnt steak, mashed potatoes that looked like they belonged in a science lab, charred asparagus, and a soupy mess for dessert. In a fit of desperation, I threw everything on the table, convinced I could still make it look presentable. When my date arrived, she was cheerful and excited, completely unaware of the chaos I had just caused in my kitchen. I greeted her at the door with a nervous smile, trying to mask the disaster behind me. But she took one look at the table and raised an eyebrow. "Wow, you went all out," she said, impressed by the effort I'd put into the setup. I smiled, relieved for a moment, thinking maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. But as she dug into the steak, I could see the discomfort on her face. It was overcooked and tough, and she quickly switched to the mashed potatoes, only to recoil at the texture. The asparagus was no better. Finally, she tried the chocolate mousse and, well, let's just say it didn't improve the mood. At that moment, I knew I had failed. There was no saving it. My perfect dinner had turned into a complete disaster. I apologized profusely, but she just laughed it off. "It's okay," she said, "at least you tried." But I could tell she was struggling to hide the discomfort. And honestly, I was too embarrassed to even offer a follow-up meal. The night ended early. She said she appreciated the effort but had to leave for an early meeting the next day. So, yeah, I guess I learned my lesson the hard way. Sometimes it's better to just order takeout, especially if you're trying to impress someone. Or at least not try a 3-course meal when you're an amateur. I haven't seen her again, but I've definitely learned to stick to the basics and leave the gourmet cooking to the professionals. And that's how I nearly burned down my apartment trying to impress my date with my cooking skills. TLDR, tried to impress my date with a homemade dinner, burned everything, and nearly set my apartment on fire in the process. Date ended early. Never cooking again. TIFU by accidentally sending a love letter to my boss instead of my girlfriend. So, I'm a 28-year-old guy, working as a junior project manager for a mid-sized tech company. My life had been fairly uneventful for the past few months, nothing major happening at work or in my personal life. Then one Tuesday, everything went south, fast. It all started with a simple text message, and I ended up nearly losing my job, ruining my relationship, and somehow managing to save face, mostly. Let me backtrack a little bit. I've been dating my girlfriend, Sarah, for about a year. Things have been going great, and we've always had this playful, goofy relationship where we text each other love notes, memes, random thoughts, and some pretty embarrassing stuff. You know, all that cute, cringy stuff you do when you're in love but not afraid to be a little bit ridiculous. Anyway, that morning, we had exchanged a couple of goofy texts while I was at work, and I was feeling particularly sentimental that day. You know how some mornings you just wake up feeling like everything's going well in your life, and you're in that romantic mood? That was me. So, I decided to type up this long, heartfelt message for Sarah, telling her how much she meant to me, how happy she made me, and how I couldn't wait to spend more time together. It was one of those gushy love letters that I was pretty sure would make her smile, and maybe even tear up a little. I spent about 15 minutes crafting this perfect little piece of writing. I put my heart and soul into it, hoping to send it when I got a quick break. It was about 300 words long, with a little poem I made up and everything. I was very proud of it. Now, for the part that would make this all go horribly wrong, I use a work phone for both work and personal stuff. It's not the ideal setup, but I've been too lazy to deal with setting up a personal phone separate from my work one. The problem is, the text message app one use on my phone is shared for both work and personal contacts, and I sometimes forget which contact is which when I send things. So, I'm sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone while waiting for a meeting to start. I finish reading through some emails, reply to a couple of texts from Sarah, and then go back to finishing the letter I'd started for her. I carefully review the message one last time, make a couple of small edits, and then hit send. It felt like an eternity between hitting send and my phone buzzing a moment later. But when I looked at the screen, my heart sank. I hadn't sent the message to Sarah. I had sent it to my boss's Greg. Now, let me give you some background on Greg. He's a 45-year-old, no-nonsense kind of guy. Very professional, often a little intimidating, but we get along fine. He's been in the industry for decades and was the one who hired me a year ago. We've had some casual conversations here and there, but he's always kept it strictly professional. He's also a married man, with kids. Definitely not someone you would ever want to send a love letter to, especially one as over-the-top as the one I had just written. I instantly went pale, my hands started shaking, and I stared at the screen for a full minute, hoping that maybe I was hallucinating and the message was still sitting in my drafts folder. But no. There it was, at the top of our chat, the long, gushy love letter I had just sent to my boss. The message started with, "My dearest Sarah, I can't imagine a day without you," and ended with, "I love you more than words can express, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you. Yours forever, / my name." All of it, right there in front of my eyes. I'm pretty sure I could hear the sound of my career crashing and burning in the distance. I immediately began typing a frantic apology. But as I started to write, I realized that there was no way to salvage the situation. How could I explain to my boss that I had accidentally sent him a heartfelt love letter meant for my girlfriend? It was just too embarrassing. I had already been pretty awkward at work a few times before, but this? This was on another level entirely. In a panic, I hit the call button on his contact. The phone rang, and I'm sitting there sweating, wishing for the sweet release of death. Finally, Greg answered the phone. I could hear the confusion in his voice as he said, "Hello?" "Hi, Greg," I said, my voice trembling. I think I just sent you something I wasn't supposed to. It was meant for my girlfriend, not you. I'm really sorry." "I didn't mean to." "Wait," he interrupted, sounding almost amused. "You sent me what?" I sent you a love letter." "It was meant for my girlfriend, not you," I said, my face turning crimson. "Please don't fire me." "I swear, I didn't mean to." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I was bracing myself for the worst. I thought I was going to get an earful of anger, or worse, a "you're fired" speech. But instead, Greg burst into laughter. "You know, I don't think I've ever received a love letter like that before," he said, still chuckling. That was something. I couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic, but I was too relieved to care. I apologized profusely, telling him that I was just mortified and that I'd never live this down. Greg, to his credit, was surprisingly understanding. He told me that as long as I didn't make a habit of sending him love letters, he wasn't going to hold it against me. He even joked that he'd tell the team about it as long as I didn't mind him sharing my heartfelt message at the next meeting. After hanging up, I spent the next hour sitting in my office, not able to focus on anything. I was still mentally replaying the conversation, wondering if I'd just narrowly avoided career suicide. My coworkers began trickling back into the office, and I could tell they were all aware that something had happened. Everyone could feel the awkwardness. But to my surprise, nobody brought it up, and Greg didn't mention it again either. Later that day, Sarah texted me asking if I'd sent the message yet, and I had to tell her what happened. She thought it was hilarious and promised not to tease me too much, though I'm pretty sure she enjoyed the story far more than I did. So, to wrap it all up, I didn't get fired, but I now have an embarrassing story that will likely follow me for the rest of my career. Greg and I are cool, but every time he calls, I can't help but cringe, wondering if he remembers the love letter. I guess the lesson here is, don't mix work and personal life, and definitely don't send a love letter to your boss by accident. If I've learned anything from this, it's that technology is a cruel beast, and nothing is safe from a text message slip-up. So, this happened a couple of weeks ago and I still can't believe the mess I got myself into. I'm a 30-year-old guy living in a small apartment. I've always been pretty good at keeping things organized, but I've got a bit of a problem when it comes to impulse purchases, especially when it involves technology. Recently, I decided to upgrade my home office setup, so I started researching the best ergonomic desk chairs on the market. I had heard great things about one particular chair, let's call it the Comfy Pro 5000. The reviews were stellar, the price was a bit steep but not outrageous, and the features sounded incredible. It's the kind of chair you imagine yourself lounging in after a long day of work, with lumbar support that could probably save your life. So, I clicked buy now, not really thinking twice about the amount of money I was about to drop on this seemingly magical chair. The package arrived in about 3 days. When I opened the box, I was stunned by how massive it was. The chair was packed with foam, bolts, and a huge assembly manual that looked like it could have been used as a textbook for engineering students. At that point, I realized I might have gotten in over my head. But the excitement of my new chair pushed me forward, so I decided to get to work assembling it. I followed the instructions as best as I could, but there were so many pieces, and some of the diagrams seemed to be missing a few details. After about an hour, I had managed to put together most of it, but the last part, the armrests, were giving me trouble. The bolts didn't seem to align properly, and I was starting to get frustrated. My fingers were sore, and I could feel the sweat building up on my forehead. At this point, I decided to take a break. I sat on the half-assembled chair and took a deep breath. It felt kind of nice, actually. Even with the incomplete armrests, the chair was incredibly comfortable. I told myself that the rest of the assembly would be easy, and that I was probably just overthinking it. I went to the kitchen to grab a snack and drink some water. As I was munching on some chips, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but figured it might be a neighbor or delivery. I opened the door, and standing there was a guy in a delivery uniform holding another package. My heart sank as soon as I saw what it was. It was another Comfy Pro 5000 chair, identical to the one I was currently struggling to assemble. I stood there for a moment, staring at the box. My brain started to process what was happening. Did I order two? I asked myself. No, I definitely didn't. The only conclusion I could come to was that there had been a mix-up with the order. Maybe I had somehow double-clicked while checking out, or the company had just sent me an extra one by mistake. Either way, I was now the proud owner of two extremely expensive, ergonomically designed chairs. The delivery guy seemed a little confused but was obviously in a hurry, so he just handed me the box and left. As I stood there holding the second chair, I had a decision to make. I knew I could return it, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to go through that hassle. Plus, it was a very nice chair. Maybe I could just keep it as a spare or something? But then I remembered that I didn't exactly have room for 2 chairs. My apartment wasn't tiny, but it wasn't big either, and there was no way I could fit 2 of these massive things in my office without looking like a chair hoarder. I eventually decided to just put the second chair in the corner of my living room. It's fine, I told myself. I'll figure it out later. A few days went by, and my life continued as normal. I was still using the chair in my office, though it wasn't quite as comfortable as I remembered when I first tried it out. I kept meaning to finish putting it together properly, but life just kept getting in the way. That is until I received a call from my friend, Steve. Steve had been my best friend since college. He was the kind of guy who always had a solution to any problem and never hesitated to offer his help. We hadn't hung out in a while, so he asked if I wanted to grab a drink at a bar near my place. Of course, I said yes. I wasn't one to turn down an opportunity to hang out, and I needed a break from my never-ending work tasks. We met up at the bar, had some drinks, and caught up. We were talking about everything from work to relationships, and I could feel the weight of stress lifting off my shoulders. After a while, Steve brought up a topic that made me freeze. Hey, man, you know that chair you've been talking about? The Comfy Pro 5000 or whatever? I've been meaning to get one of those. Heard they're amazing. You still using it? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, I love it. It's just a bit of a pain to put together. I'm almost there though, just haven't finished it. Steve gave me an enthusiastic nod. Dude, I've been wanting one for so long. How about you sell it to me? I'll pay you a decent price. I froze. My mind raced. Here was the solution to my chair dilemma: sell Steve the extra one. I didn't need 2 chairs, and Steve wanted one. It made perfect sense. Sure, man. I've got another one sitting around, actually. I'll give you a good deal, I said, feeling like I was doing the right thing. Steve was excited, and we made plans for him to come by the next day to pick up the chair. The next day arrived, and I was getting the chair ready for Steve. I decided to assemble it fully so that it would look presentable when he came over. I went to tighten the last bolt on the armrests, and as I did, the chair suddenly tipped over and collapsed on me. I fell to the floor with a loud thud. I lay there for a moment, stunned, as I realized that somehow, in my enthusiasm to get the chair ready for sale, I had made a fatal mistake. I hadn't fully tightened all the bolts before trying to sit in it. I quickly scrambled to my feet, feeling a bit like a fool. But it didn't end there. I managed to get the chair back up, only for the seat cushion to detach from the frame. It was a disaster. I spent the next hour trying to fix the thing, but every time I thought I had it right, something else would break or fall off. Eventually, Steve arrived, and I had to admit defeat. I think I messed up the chair. It's not in the best condition right now, I told him, feeling embarrassed. Steve stared at the disassembled chair and then back at me. Dude, are you sure? I mean, it looks like it was a nice chair, I sighed. I'll just give you the second one for free, man. Honestly, I'm better off without it. Steve looked at me for a second before cracking a smile. You know, I think I'll pass for now. I'm good with just a regular office chair. But hey, maybe next time? And that's how I ended up with 2 unusable chairs and a huge mess to clean up. Now I'm stuck with one chair that's missing bolts and the other that's not even worth trying to salvage. At least I can laugh about it now, but honestly, I still don't know what to do with these chairs. I guess the lesson here is, if you're going to buy 2 expensive chairs, make sure you don't mess up assembling them, or at least keep your friend away from your apartment before everything falls apart. TIFU by trying to fix a plumbing issue in my house myself, and it ended up flooding my entire living room, destroying a ton of my stuff, and costing me a fortune in repairs. It all started a few weeks ago. I'm not exactly a handy person, but when it comes to small household issues, I tend to think I can figure it out myself. I live alone, so there's no one around to help, and I guess I have a bit of that "how hard can it be" mentality that tends to get people in trouble. I had been noticing that the toilet in my bathroom wasn't flushing properly. It would sometimes make a weird gurgling sound and occasionally overflow, especially if I tried to flush more than once in a short period. It wasn't exactly a full-blown disaster, but it was annoying. I figured it was probably a clogged pipe or something simple, so I did a little research online about how to fix toilet plumbing issues. I found a couple of DIY videos that made it look like a quick and easy job. They showed how to fix clogs and tighten loose connections, so I thought, hey, I can do this. I bought a couple of basic tools, plunger, a pipe wrench, some sealant, and a drain snake. Armed with my newfound knowledge, I decided to tackle the problem on a Saturday morning. I wasn't in a rush, so I figured I'd take my time, follow the steps in the video, and get the job done. How hard could it be, right? I started by turning off the water supply to the toilet and removing the tank lid to inspect the inner workings. I checked the flush valve and the flapper, as one of the videos suggested, and everything seemed fine. So, I moved on to the next step, which was to inspect the pipes under the toilet. The pipe that connects the toilet to the sewer line seemed a little loose, so I thought tightening it would probably solve my problem. I grabbed my pipe wrench, but I underestimated how tight these things can be. I applied a little too much force, and before I knew it, the pipe came loose completely and water started spraying everywhere. I panicked. I quickly tried to put the pipe back in place, but it was too late. Water was spraying out like a geyser, and it was getting all over the floor. At first, I thought it was just a minor leak, but as the water spread across the bathroom floor, I realized I had made a huge mistake. I frantically tried to stop the flow, but the pipe wouldn't reconnect, and the water kept flowing. In a panic, I turned off the water supply again, but by that point, the damage was done. Water was all over the floor, and I had no idea what to do next. I figured the best option was to call a plumber. I picked up my phone, but of course, I didn't have the contact of a plumber on hand, and it was a Saturday, so I knew it was going to be difficult to get one on short notice. I quickly searched online and found a few local plumbers who were open, but they all had busy schedules or weren't available until the next day. Desperate to stop the water from spreading, I grabbed a towel and tried to soak up the mess, but it was no use. The water just kept coming. In my frantic state, I thought I could at least try to get the water out of the bathroom before it spread to the rest of the house. I started moving things away from the area, but that's when I noticed the water had started seeping through the floorboards into the living room. The floor in the hallway was starting to get wet, and I could see water pooling by the doorframe leading into the living room. Panic set in. I moved as fast as I could to prevent more water from entering the main part of the house, but I wasn't quick enough. By the time the plumber finally arrived later that afternoon, it was too late. The damage had already been done. The water had spread into the living room, and the carpet was soaked. My brand new couch, which I'd just bought a few months ago, was ruined. The water had seeped into the cushions, and no amount of drying was going to save it. My coffee table, which I had inherited from my grandmother, was damaged as well. The wood had warped, and I could see watermarks all over it. The area rug I'd spent weeks searching for was completely soaked through. It was heartbreaking. The plumber finally arrived, and he took one look at the situation and just shook his head. He quickly fixed the issue under the toilet. Turns out, I had over-tightened the connection, causing the leak, but the damage was already done. He told me that I would need to replace the flooring in both the bathroom and the living room, and I would likely need to replace most of my furniture. At that point, I was just defeated. The insurance adjuster came a few days later, and after assessing the damage, they told me that I would be covered for the repairs to the flooring and the furniture. However, the deductible was quite high, and I would end up paying quite a bit out of pocket. I had to hire a restoration company to dry everything out, and they had to rip up the carpet and padding in both rooms. The plumbing repair cost me a couple of $100, and the damage to the furniture was even worse. Replacing everything, including the flooring, would end up costing me a small fortune. The whole ordeal turned into a nightmare that I could have avoided if I'd just called a professional from the start. Instead, I tried to save a little money and ended up costing myself far more than I would have spent on a simple plumbing service call. To make matters worse, I couldn't even enjoy the weekend because I spent the next 2 days cleaning up and dealing with insurance claims and contractors. All of that because I thought I could handle a plumbing issue that, in hindsight, was far beyond my skill level. I learned a valuable lesson from this experience. If you don't know what you're doing, just call a professional. It's not worth trying to save a few bucks when it could lead to a major disaster. Now, I'll be much more cautious about trying to fix things on my own, and I'll leave the plumbing, and most other repairs, to the experts from now on. So, I'm an average guy, nothing too special, but I've got a pretty major crush on this girl in my class. Let's call her Emma. She's smart, funny, and genuinely kind. We've been hanging out for a few months now, and while I've always gotten along with her, I've never really had the courage to make a move. The thing is, we'd always grab coffee or go out to eat, and I noticed she really appreciated when people went the extra mile to show they cared. She had mentioned, in passing, that she loved homemade meals and thought it was a thoughtful way to show someone you're serious about them. So, with that information rattling around in my brain for a few weeks, I decided to step up my game. I was going to cook her a special dinner. Now, I've never been a great cook. I can microwave a frozen dinner and make pasta, but that's about it. But hey, how hard could it be, right? I had a couple of days to prepare, and there are plenty of YouTube tutorials. I could totally pull this off. I spent hours scrolling through recipe websites and watching cooking videos. Eventually, I settled on a simple homemade chicken Alfredo. It looked fancy, but not too difficult. The only problem was, I had zero experience with making a cream sauce or cooking chicken properly. But hey, how bad could it be? I went to the store and picked up everything I'd need: chicken breasts, pasta, heavy cream, garlic, Parmesan cheese, butter, and whatever other ingredients I thought were important. When I got home, I realized I might have overdone it a little. I had all this fresh produce, sauces, and seasonings scattered across my kitchen. But I told myself it would be worth it. I started by preparing the chicken. According to the recipe, I had to cook it in a hot pan, and then let it rest before cutting it. Simple enough. The only thing I didn't realize was that I'd never used my stovetop at full heat before. The chicken cooked a little faster than I anticipated, and the outside of the breasts got a bit too charred while the inside was still slightly raw. Not good. But, being the genius I am, I thought I could salvage it by just cutting the chicken into smaller pieces and cooking it more in the sauce later. Mistake number 1. Now, onto the sauce. I was feeling confident at this point because I'd already sautéed the garlic in butter like the video said. The smell was heavenly. But when I added the heavy cream, things got weird. The cream started to separate, and I panicked. I had no idea what was going wrong, and the recipe didn't explain what to do if the sauce started to break. My solution? Add more butter. If a little butter is good, a lot of butter should be better, right? Long story short, the sauce quickly became this greasy, lumpy mess. At this point, I was so deep into the cooking zone that I didn't want to admit defeat. So, I just kept stirring and praying it would come together. But it didn't. It was like a buttery, garlicky disaster in a pan. I had spent over an hour on this dish and had no clue how to save it. But I wasn't about to give up now. I told myself, it's fine, it's just a couple of things that went wrong. I can still make this work. The next step was to cook the pasta. I figured boiling water was something I could handle, so I filled up a pot, tossed in the noodles, and waited. Unfortunately, I got so focused on trying to salvage the sauce that I completely forgot about the pasta. By the time I remembered, the noodles had turned into an overcooked, mushy mess. But I was too deep in at this point to give up. I dumped the soggy pasta into the sauce, hoping it would all blend together. It didn't. It was just a bowl of lumpy, greasy noodles with undercooked chicken. The moment of truth had arrived. I called Emma and invited her over, hoping that somehow, some miracle would make everything turn out okay. She arrived with a big smile on her face, clearly excited for the dinner. I could tell she was trying to be polite when she saw the state of the meal, but I could tell by her face that she knew something was off. I had spent so much time trying to salvage this disaster that I hadn't even thought about the presentation. We sat down to eat, and I scooped a bit of the pasta onto her plate. She took a bite, and I nervously waited for her reaction. At first, she tried to smile through it. I could see her trying to force herself to chew, but she couldn't. Her face scrunched up as she swallowed the bite, and then she set the fork down gently. She looked at me with a sympathetic expression and said, "Hey, it's the thought that counts, right?" I tried to laugh it off, but deep down I was mortified. I couldn't believe I had spent all this time making something so terrible. Emma, being the angel she is, didn't make a big deal about it, but I could tell she was struggling to hide her disgust. I should have just ordered takeout. But wait, it gets worse. At this point, my stomach was feeling a bit off, but I figured it was just nerves. I thought maybe I had eaten too much of my own failed creation and my body was just rejecting the experience. I excused myself to the bathroom, and as I was washing my hands, I started feeling dizzy. My stomach churned, and before I knew it, I was leaning over the sink, about to lose everything I'd just eaten. I'm not sure what happened next, but it all went downhill fast. I threw up, not just once, but several times. The combination of undercooked chicken and oversalted butter made me sick to my stomach. And because I hadn't eaten much all day in preparation for this grand dinner, it was even worse. I couldn't stop. Emma, hearing the commotion, knocked on the bathroom door. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, a bit concerned. I had to admit it at that point, I was not okay. I opened the door to find Emma standing there, wide-eyed, as I stumbled out of the bathroom looking like death warmed over. "Yeah, I think the chicken wasn't fully cooked," I muttered. "I'm so sorry. This was a huge mistake." She was sweet about it, but I could tell she was trying not to laugh at my disastrous attempt to impress her. She helped me get some water and called me a cab to the hospital, just in case. I was too embarrassed to call anyone else. After a very uncomfortable night in the ER, where they confirmed I'd given myself food poisoning from the undercooked chicken, I learned an important lesson. I haven't tried to cook a meal for anyone since. I might not have won her heart with my culinary skills, but Emma and I are still good friends. Honestly, I'm just thankful she didn't ghost me after the whole ordeal. So yeah, TIFU by thinking I could impress a girl with my cooking skills and ending up with a trip to the ER instead. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by inviting my ex-girlfriend to my wedding, and it became a total disaster. A bit of backstory: I, at 29M, had been in a pretty serious relationship with my ex, 27F, for about 5 years. We were in our early 20s and had everything planned out. We talked about marriage, kids, and growing old together. We were basically inseparable. But like so many young relationships, we hit a rough patch after a couple of years. We had a lot of differences, and eventually, we broke up. The breakup was messy, and we both said some things we regretted, but I thought we'd moved on after some time apart. I didn't think we would ever get back together, but I hoped we could stay friends. That was a huge mistake. Fast forward to now, I'm engaged to my wonderful fiancé, Sarah, 28F. We've been together for almost 2 years, and things have been amazing. Sarah is everything I could have ever asked for in a partner. I wanted my wedding to be perfect, and I was excited for all the people I care about to be there. Here's where I made my first mistake: I hadn't fully cut ties with my ex. Over the past year or so, we had stayed in sporadic contact, mostly through texts or social media comments. We'd occasionally talk about how our lives were going, but I thought it was just the normal thing for exes who had spent a significant amount of time together. We had both moved on, or so I thought. One day, out of the blue, my ex sent me a message saying she had been invited to a wedding of one of our mutual friends, and she would love to see me again. I thought, why not? We've had some time apart, and there's no reason we can't be civil. So, I agreed to meet up. We had lunch, chatted about life, and caught up on the things we'd missed. The conversation was lighthearted, and I genuinely enjoyed catching up with her. She even asked me about my upcoming wedding and how everything was going. I proudly told her about Sarah, how I was excited to marry her, and how everything had fallen into place for me. And then, out of nowhere, my ex hit me with the bombshell. You know, if I wasn't invited, I wouldn't be able to be there, right? I froze. It didn't occur to me that she would want to come to the wedding. Of course, my first instinct was to tell her she wasn't invited, but then something weird happened. I hesitated. I thought about how we had shared so much together in the past. We had history. And maybe I was just being overly cautious about hurting her feelings. Plus, she said she was genuinely happy for me and Sarah, and it felt nice to hear her be so mature about things. So, without thinking it through, I said, you know, I think it would be fine if you came. We've been through a lot together, and you were a big part of my life for a long time. It would be good to see you there. Big mistake. I really should have known better. So, I told Sarah that I'd invited my ex to the wedding. I figured it would be a nice gesture. I thought Sarah would be fine with it because I genuinely didn't think it would be a big deal. Sarah, however, was not thrilled. She wasn't rude about it, but I could tell she wasn't too keen on the idea. Are you sure about this? She asked. I don't want anyone making things awkward on our big day. I assured her everything would be fine. After all, my ex and I were just friends now, and I was marrying Sarah, not her. There was no reason for it to be an issue. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything was going smoothly. I was feeling great. The ceremony was beautiful, the guests were happy, and I was surrounded by the people who meant the most to me. Sarah looked absolutely stunning, and I couldn't wait to marry her. Everything was perfect, until my ex showed up. She walked in wearing a bright red dress. Now, I'm no fashion expert, but I immediately felt the tension in the air. I could see Sarah's face shift, and I knew something was wrong. But I thought, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm just nervous. Then, during the reception, things really started to go south. My ex started mingling with a few of the other guests, and it wasn't long before I noticed that she was being a bit too friendly with some of my friends. There was one point where I saw her laughing and chatting with one of my old college buddies for what seemed like a little too long. I could tell that Sarah was starting to get visibly uncomfortable, but I kept trying to brush it off. That's when the real chaos began. Sarah, who had been calm throughout the whole night, suddenly stood up in the middle of the reception and grabbed my arm. We need to talk, she whispered, and I followed her outside to the back of the venue. She was shaking with anger. I don't want her here. She's making things awkward. You should never have invited her, and I'm done pretending like this isn't bothering me. Now, normally I'd try to calm Sarah down, but in this moment, I was feeling defensive. She's just here to support me. It's not a big deal. But Sarah wasn't having it. You should have thought about me and my feelings. Why would you invite your ex to our wedding when you knew it would make me uncomfortable? I was flustered. I didn't know how to fix this. So, in a moment of panic, I did something stupid. I told Sarah that I would go talk to my ex and ask her to leave. I thought it was the best course of action to salvage things, but that only made the situation worse. I walked up to my ex, who was chatting with another group of people. I politely asked her if she could leave, explaining that Sarah was uncomfortable. My ex didn't take it well. Really? After everything we've been through, you're going to kick me out of your wedding, she said, raising her voice. You owe me better than this. I tried to stay calm, but the more I explained, the angrier she got. At one point, she stormed off, but not before making a huge scene in front of everyone. She started yelling at me, calling me all kinds of names, and saying I was a coward for not standing up to Sarah. I felt like I was losing control of everything. To make matters worse, when I returned to Sarah to explain what had happened, she was crying. "You chose her over me," she said. "I can't believe you did this to me." After that, everything spiraled. My ex left, but the damage was already done. Sarah and I fought for hours, and the wedding that had been so perfect at the start turned into an emotional wreck. I ended up having to apologize to everyone, including my family, who had noticed the tension. The wedding ended up being memorable, but not for the right reasons. To make things worse, my ex texted me later that night, saying she was glad to have made me choose. She'd always known I was weak and couldn't let go of the past. I spent the rest of the weekend trying to salvage my relationship with Sarah. Thankfully, we eventually worked through things, but it took time. A lot of time. The whole experience taught me the importance of boundaries and the fact that some people, exes included, need to stay out of certain situations. So yeah, I totally messed up by inviting my ex to my wedding. Lesson learned. Never again. So, last Saturday, I made a decision that I thought would be a fun, low-key way to spend the afternoon. I'd been hearing a lot about this new escape room place that opened in town. You know, the kind where you're locked in a room and have to solve a bunch of puzzles to escape before time runs out. It sounded like a blast, so I called up my friend Sam, who's always down for an adventure, and we booked a spot for the 3 p.m. slot. I'll admit, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had seen the trailers on social media, and they seemed fun, but also, I wasn't exactly sure how this was going to go. Sam and I met up at the place, which was a surprisingly big building for an escape room venue. It had this cool, slightly eerie vibe when we walked in, lots of antique furniture, low lighting, and a receptionist who greeted us with an almost suspiciously cheerful demeanor. After signing waivers, a little off-putting, but I didn't think much of it, we were handed a set of instructions for the room we'd chosen, a Victorian murder mystery-themed escape room. It was supposed to be intense, like a real-life mystery, so we were both ready for some immersive fun. The receptionist gave us a quick briefing and then led us into the room. I didn't expect the level of detail I saw inside. The walls were lined with heavy drapes, the floor was covered with old rugs, and there were even faint sounds of creaking and whispering. The theme was set. We were supposed to be solving a murder that took place in this fictional mansion. We had 1 hour to figure out who the murderer was, how they did it, and where they were hiding the body. Now, I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but I've seen my fair share of crime shows and movies. Sam, however, was a different story. He had been talking up his obsessive-compulsive attention to detail, so I assumed he'd be the brains of this operation. I was just along for the ride, contributing when I could but mostly just enjoying the atmosphere. The puzzles started off simple enough, finding hidden messages, decoding symbols, and moving bookshelves to uncover secret compartments. It was actually kind of thrilling, and before I knew it, the time was flying by. Sam and I were in sync, and we were solving puzzles faster than I expected. There was only one problem. As we progressed, I started to notice the atmosphere getting stranger. At first, I chalked it up to the set design. There were some parts of the room that felt a little too real, like the old fireplace in the corner that had a slight burning smell. There was also this very faint sound of footsteps echoing through the room, which made me glance around more than once, wondering if maybe it was some staff member moving in the background. But I didn't hear anyone talking, and the room seemed empty. No one came in or out. At around the 40-minute mark, Sam and I had solved all the puzzles and were just about to crack the final clue. There was a large ornate painting hanging on one of the walls, and we'd been told that the answer would be hidden behind it. We reached for it, and the painting slid open easily enough. What we weren't prepared for was the sight behind it. There was a small, darkened passageway leading into another room, but the strangest part? There was a man standing at the end of the passageway. A tall, older man, dressed in an outfit that looked straight out of the Victorian era, complete with a long black coat and a bowler hat. His expression was blank, almost eerie. For a moment, I froze, thinking this was part of the experience, like an actor who was going to give us some cryptic clue or something. Sam was the first to speak, asking, is everything all right? Are we supposed to follow you? The man didn't move or say anything. Instead, he just stood there, motionless, staring at us. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I figured maybe he was just doing a really good job with the immersion. We'd been warned that the actors sometimes stayed in character, so maybe he was just taking it a bit far. I turned back to the final puzzle we had to solve, trying to ignore the figure in the doorway. I felt a little uncomfortable, but I pushed that feeling down and focused. Sam, however, was clearly disturbed. "Dude, I don't like this." "Something's off," he muttered. He was right. The atmosphere had shifted. It was as if the room got colder, and the whispers I'd been hearing became clearer. It wasn't just faint creaking now, it was as if someone was walking around us, just out of sight. That's when things started to get weird. The lights flickered. Not in the spooky way you'd expect, but more like they were about to go out. The figure in the doorway started moving. I didn't notice him take a step, but suddenly he was closer, just standing there, much nearer than he had been before. My heart started pounding. This wasn't part of the game. "Sam, we need to get out of here." "This isn't part of the escape room," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. But as I looked at Sam, I saw that he had a look of pure terror on his face. "We're locked in," he said, his voice trembling. I turned to the door. It was still closed, but the lock wasn't even engaged. I jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I checked the other doorways, the secret compartments, but everything was sealed tight. Panic started creeping in. I began pounding on the door, yelling for someone to come help us. Sam joined in. But no one came. That's when I heard it, a voice. Low, muffled, but distinct. It was coming from the other room, where the figure had just been standing. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice whispered. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I wanted to believe this was just part of the experience, but my gut told me it wasn't. I looked back at the man, and for the first time, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His eyes were glowing, faintly, an eerie shade of green. He wasn't just an actor. He wasn't even human. At that moment, the lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. Sam screamed, and I grabbed his arm, trying to calm him down. I knew I had to get us out. Just as I was about to lose it completely, the door behind us opened. A staff member walked in, looking completely unfazed by what had just happened. "Oh, there you are. We thought you guys had already finished the puzzle." "Time's up," he said casually, like nothing had happened. Sam and I bolted out of there faster than I've ever moved in my life, adrenaline pumping through my veins. We didn't say a word to the staff. We just got in our car and drove away, not looking back. To this day, I'm not sure what happened in that room. Was it an elaborate prank by the escape room company? Was there some supernatural thing going on? I have no idea. But I do know one thing, I won't be going back to an escape room anytime soon. Never again. TIFU by trying to impress my date with a home-cooked meal that ended in a fire, a hospital visit, and a ruined relationship. It all started about 3 months ago when I matched with this girl on a dating app. Let's call her Sarah. We had been talking for a while, and things seemed to be going well. We both had a lot in common, and she was smart, funny, and, frankly, way out of my league. After a few weeks of messaging, I suggested we meet in person. She was up for it, and after some back and forth, we decided on a casual date at my place. I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to really impress her, not just with my charming personality, which I didn't have much faith in, but with my culinary skills. I'd been following cooking YouTube channels for months and had been practicing my knife skills and learning how to make fancy dishes. I figured cooking a meal at home would make the evening more intimate and unique. So, I went all out. I planned a 4-course meal. Appetizers, a salad, a main course with a fancy French name I could barely pronounce, and dessert. I spent hours gathering ingredients, chopping vegetables, marinating proteins, and cleaning my apartment, which was a task in itself because I hadn't cleaned in a while. I was feeling good about it. I'd watched enough cooking tutorials and read enough food blogs to convince myself I was basically a professional chef. I wasn't just going to cook a meal, I was going to create an experience. The night of the date came, and Sarah showed up at my place right on time. She looked amazing, way better than I expected, and I could tell she was excited to see what I'd made. I greeted her at the door, gave her a glass of wine, and led her into the kitchen, where everything was prepped and ready. At least, I thought it was. Now, here's where I went wrong. I had planned to make a complicated dish that involved searing a steak and finishing it in the oven. I'd seen it done 1,000 times on the Food Network and YouTube, so it couldn't possibly go wrong. But somehow, I hadn't factored in my own nerves and lack of experience with actually using my oven properly. I had set the oven temperature too high, thinking that it would make the steak cook faster. The recipe said 350 degrees Fahrenheit, but I cranked it to 450 degrees Fahrenheit because I was in a rush. I also didn't know that the cast iron skillet I was using was a bit too small for the size of the steak, so when I tried to sear it, the oil started splattering all over the stove. I could feel the sweat trickling down my face as I panicked a little, but I kept trying to act calm. Sarah was sitting in the dining room, sipping her wine and looking at me with what I hoped was admiration. But then, the oil on the stovetop caught fire. I don't know how or why, maybe it was the combination of the heat, the splattering, and the grease, but I heard a sizzle, followed by a crackling sound, and before I knew it, flames shot up from the stove. I froze for a moment. I had no idea what to do. I was watching the fire grow, thinking that maybe if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. But, of course, it didn't. It kept growing. I finally snapped out of it and remembered I should use the fire extinguisher. I ran to the closet where I thought I had one, but I couldn't find it. Panic set in. I felt completely useless. Sarah, hearing the commotion, came running into the kitchen. The first thing she said was, "Is everything okay?" in a tone that was a mix of concern and disbelief. No, everything is not okay," I said, finally grabbing a dish towel and trying to put out the flames by smothering the fire. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. By this time, the fire had spread a little, and I panicked even more. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher told me to stay calm and get out of the house, so I quickly grabbed Sarah, and we both ran out into the street. At this point, I could hear the sirens in the distance, and I watched as smoke started billowing out of my apartment window. I felt like the biggest idiot. There I was, in the street, standing next to Sarah, who looked horrified and bewildered. "I'm really sorry about this," I said, trying to hold back the tears of embarrassment. "This is so not how I wanted this evening to go." After a few minutes, the fire trucks arrived, and the firefighters went inside to put out the flames. It took them a while, but thankfully, they got the fire under control before it spread too far. The damage wasn't catastrophic, but my kitchen was toast, literally. The oven, the stove, the countertop, everything was pretty much ruined. They said it was a miracle that the fire didn't spread to the rest of the building. Sarah, bless her heart, was so calm and understanding throughout the entire thing. But I could tell that she was starting to distance herself emotionally. I don't know if it was the shock of the fire or the embarrassment of what had just happened, but I could feel her pulling away. Once the firefighters cleared out, Sarah and I were left standing outside. She looked at me and said, "I think it's best if we just call it a night." I nodded, unable to say anything more. "I'm really sorry," I said again. "I'm an idiot." "I'm just glad you're okay," she replied, her face a mix of confusion and discomfort. "I'll call a cab. I'll text you later." And that was it. That was the last time I saw her. She never texted me later. I tried reaching out a couple of times to apologize, but I never heard back. A few weeks later, I got the bill for the damage from the fire, which was bad enough, but the worst part was the emotional toll it took. Not only did I lose the girl I liked, but I also felt like an absolute failure. I had tried so hard to make a good impression, and instead, I turned my date into a disaster. So, yeah. I guess that's my TIFU. Don't try to impress someone with a fancy meal if you don't know what you're doing in the kitchen. And definitely make sure you have a fire extinguisher in your apartment. Now, I stick to ordering takeout. It's a lot safer, and no one gets hurt. Moral of the story: don't cook steaks at 450 degrees Fahrenheit if you don't know what you're doing. And maybe just stick to Netflix and chill next time. TIFU: by attempting to impress my boss with a fancy dinner, only to end up with a ruined reputation, an embarrassing medical bill, and a questionable online reputation. So, here's the situation. I work for a pretty high-profile marketing agency, and as is the case with most businesses, there are certain expectations that come with the job. One of those expectations is to network and build relationships with clients, and sometimes, this means meeting them in social settings outside of work, like dinners or drinks. I'm usually not great at this kind of stuff. I'm awkward, a bit introverted, and I can't really keep up with small talk without stumbling over my words. But there was this one client, let's call him Dave, who had been somewhat difficult to work with. His company was big, influential, and always seemed to have more leverage than we did. Dave was demanding, sharp, and his patience was often short. He was known for expecting nothing less than perfection from everyone. I'd heard some horror stories about people who had worked with him, but honestly, I didn't care. I knew that securing a deal with him could mean a huge bonus for the entire team, and a promotion for me. So when my boss, who was aware of how hard I'd been working on this project, casually mentioned one day that Dave wanted to meet up for a dinner to chat about potential collaboration, I jumped at the opportunity. "I'll go," I said with way too much confidence, trying to mask my nervousness. My boss, who clearly didn't see me as a person who could handle delicate situations like this, raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "All right, make sure it's a good one. We're relying on you to impress him." So, of course, I took that as a challenge. I researched the best, most exclusive restaurant in the city. The place was expensive, renowned, and had a reputation for offering a unique dining experience. I didn't even look at the menu. If Dave was into it, I figured I had to be into it. I made the reservation for 7 p.m. and sent Dave the details. The day arrived, and I spent hours prepping myself. I put on my best suit, polished my shoes, and spent a good amount of time making sure I didn't smell like sweat or anxiety. It's a thing. I arrived early and tried to compose myself, pretending like I had everything under control. It didn't help that I had no idea what to say to Dave when he showed up. He was notorious for being silent for long stretches, allowing his companions to squirm with awkwardness. But anyway, the evening started with what I assumed was a calm start. Dave walked in, right on time, and with his impeccable sense of style, I knew I was outclassed. We greeted each other, and after a few brief pleasantries, I asked if he'd like to start with some wine. At this point, I should have just gone with something simple. But no, I had to go for something impressive. The waiter, who I could tell was judging me by my stiff posture, brought out a bottle of some rare, expensive wine. I had no idea what kind it was, but the price tag was something close to my rent for the month. I thought this would set the tone. The wine was poured, and Dave seemed to give a quick nod of approval. This was good. Or so I thought. The appetizers came next, and things were actually going okay. Dave made some small talk about the industry, and I tried my best to match his level of sophistication. But then came the main course. Now, let me tell you, I'd never even heard of most of the items on the menu. But the restaurant had this thing where they offered a chef's tasting menu that was supposed to impress. It sounded fancy, and the price was even fancier. I thought, this is it, this is my chance to show Dave that I belong in the big leagues. I ordered the tasting menu for both of us, and we began. The first dish was something called foie gras and truffle compote. Now, I had no idea what foie gras was. I'd heard of it, but never seen it in person. So when the waiter brought out these small plates with this odd-looking meat on it, I felt a little nauseous. But I didn't want to look uncultured, so I dove right in. Dave took a bite. Then another. He looked at me and said, "Interesting choice." The problem, though, was that I did not enjoy it. At all. It was incredibly rich, greasy, and the texture was just wrong. I could feel my stomach starting to churn, and I began to break into a sweat. I tried to mask it, but then my body betrayed me. As I reached for the wine to wash it down, I felt the sudden, overpowering urge to, vomit. My face turned pale, and I tried to stay composed, but the world was spinning. I didn't want to ruin the dinner, so I turned away from Dave, and in that moment of desperation, I leaned over and, I threw up. Right onto the white tablecloth. On top of my very expensive tasting menu. To make things worse, the restaurant was clearly not used to this kind of thing. The waiters scrambled to clean up the mess, and Dave, he just stared at me with what can only be described as a look of sheer disbelief. My face was crimson. I couldn't even begin to apologize for the disaster unfolding in front of me. After what felt like an eternity, the staff finally cleared the table, and Dave stood up, ready to leave. "Listen, I think we need to call this night off," he said, his voice sharp. "I thought you were professional, but I can't be seen with someone who can't even handle a meal properly." I tried to apologize, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Dave left without another word, and I was left sitting in a fine dining restaurant with a bill that was nearly triple what I earned in a month. I walked out of the restaurant with my tail between my legs, not even bothering to ask the staff if I could get a doggy bag for the remains of the disaster. To make matters worse, I found out later that my boss had gotten a phone call from Dave, who had filled him in on the incident. The fallout was swift. I didn't just lose the deal. I lost face. I was the guy who threw up in front of a client at an expensive restaurant. I could tell my coworkers had a field day with it, as some of them posted memes about me on Slack. And, if you can believe it, someone even recorded the moment of me throwing up and posted it online. It got shared around for days. So, my reputation at work was officially in tatters. The worst part? I still had to pay for that dinner. I didn't even try to ask for reimbursement because I knew I'd be laughed out of the restaurant. So, TIFU by trying to impress my boss and a client with a fancy dinner, and now I have a permanent, very embarrassing online presence. If you ever meet someone who works in marketing, don't let them recommend a fancy restaurant for you unless they've already scoped it out and know what they're doing. Trust me. TIFU by accidentally sending a scandalous email to my boss instead of my friend. So, I've been working in an office for the last 2 years, and if I'm being honest, the last few months have been tough. Between the constant pressure, long hours, and never-ending emails, I've been feeling a little disconnected and stressed out. One day, after an unusually grueling meeting with my boss, I decided to take a breather and lighten my mood with a conversation with my best friend. We've been chatting pretty much non-stop about everything from work drama to memes and life updates. I'd just finished some work and was about to send over a quick email to my friend about how stressful things were and how I wanted to vent. To set the scene, I'm sitting at my desk, trying to gather my thoughts, with a ton of other tabs open. I decided I'd send a quick message to my friend to rant a little. I pulled up my email, clicked on New Email, and started typing away. This is where everything went sideways. Now, I have a ton of tabs open in my inbox and a lot of ongoing email conversations. I'm usually pretty good at multitasking, but that day, my brain wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders. Without realizing it, I had clicked on the wrong email thread. Instead of my friend's name in the recipient field, my boss's name was there. I didn't notice at all because my boss's name is right above my friends and my contacts, and I didn't stop to check the to field before typing out my message. This was a rookie mistake, I know. It's one of those things that sounds so basic, but in that moment, I completely failed to check. The email I wrote was pretty casual, and as I said, I was venting about work. It wasn't that bad on the surface, but there was one line that was incredibly inappropriate. You see, my boss had been sending me endless requests for tasks that seemed ridiculous to me. So, I wrote something along the lines of, honestly, I feel like my boss is trying to drown me in pointless work just to feel important. It's like he's going out of his way to make my life miserable. The last email he sent me was such a joke. If I hear one more thing about the frustrating system we're using or another one of his so-called team-building activities, I'm going to lose it. His email today was like, hey, let's talk about increasing efficiency. Dude, just let me breathe. I sent the email, hit send, and went back to doing my thing. But as soon as I hit send, I looked up, and my heart dropped. I saw my boss's name at the top of the thread. My stomach turned. My chest tightened. I quickly checked my sent folder, and sure enough, the email was sitting there, perfectly sent to my boss. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. My brain was doing some rapid-fire calculations. How could I fix this? What was my next move? Did I just seriously send an email like that to my boss? The only response that kept repeating in my head was, oh my God, I'm screwed. The panic set in. I immediately pulled up my boss's contact and tried to quickly find a way to explain myself, but it was too late. I had already sent it. I couldn't unsend it, and the worst part was, the email was blunt and honest, and it was really harsh in tone. There was no sugarcoating what I had said, and there was no way I could backtrack. I spent the next few minutes in a state of complete panic. I kept opening and closing the same tabs, hoping somehow that the email had magically disappeared, but of course, that wasn't the case. My palms were sweating, and I was hyper-aware of every noise around me. I swear I could hear my heartbeat. After a few minutes of mental wrestling, I decided the best course of action was to send a follow-up email immediately apologizing. But then I realized, it wasn't just about apologizing for the language, it was about explaining how the email had been meant for a friend and not my boss. Could I even get away with that? It felt risky, but I had to try. I quickly typed up a follow-up message, which read, hi boss's name, I just realized I made a huge mistake and wanted to sincerely apologize. The email I just sent you was intended for a friend, and I completely misclicked the recipient field. I deeply regret the content of the message, and it does not reflect my feelings about the work you assign me. I respect you and the company and would never want to give the wrong impression. I understand if you're upset, and I'm more than happy to discuss this further in person if you'd prefer. I hit send, but then my brain started racing again. What if this just made it worse? What if my boss thought I was trying to cover up something more malicious? What if he thought I was being insincere? What if he thought I was blaming it on a misclick and didn't believe me? There were so many potential outcomes, none of them good. I decided I couldn't wait for an email response. I walked up to my boss's office, my heart still pounding in my chest. As I stood there, knocking on the door, I felt like I was walking to my execution. When he called me in, I saw the email notification already on his screen. He looked up at me, and for a split second, I thought I was going to faint. Hey, your name, I got your email, he said, barely masking a smirk. Seems like someone's having a rough day. You okay? I took a deep breath, trying to muster as much composure as I could, and launched into my explanation. Yeah, so, I honestly thought I was sending that to my friend. I misclicked. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to make it sound like I think your ideas are ridiculous or that I don't appreciate your leadership. It was a mistake. A really, really dumb mistake. My boss just stared at me for a second, then smiled. It's all right. I figured it was a mistake. You're not the first person to make that error. Just be careful next time. I was absolutely floored. My boss, who I thought was going to fire me on the spot, actually seemed kind of understanding. He even told me not to worry about it too much, as long as it didn't happen again. He then proceeded to make a joke about the efficiency emails I had been complaining about, which, if I'm being honest, kind of made me like him a little more. I left his office, feeling both incredibly relieved and absolutely mortified. I couldn't believe I'd just had that conversation. The rest of the day was a blur of embarrassment, but at least it was over. So, yeah, I learned the hard way that you should always double-check your email recipients before you send something, especially if you're venting. Thankfully, my boss wasn't mad, but I don't think I'll ever be able to live that down in my own head. TLDR, I accidentally sent a ranting email about my boss to my boss, thought I was sending it to a friend. Had to apologize in person, and somehow, it wasn't the disaster I expected. TIFU by accidentally sending a text to my mom that was meant for my girlfriend. So, this happened yesterday, and I'm still cringing at the thought of it. I'm 24, and I've been dating this amazing woman for about 3 months. Things have been going well, she's smart, funny, easy to talk to, and, let's just say, things have escalated a bit in the relationship. We've been sending each other plenty of texts, and sometimes, we get a little, graphic. Nothing too wild, but you get the idea. Now, to provide some context here, my mom is the type of person who always texts me like she's my best friend. Always checking in, sending funny memes, sharing articles she finds interesting, or giving unsolicited advice about my life choices. She's well-meaning, but I'll be honest, there are days when I just want to throw my phone across the room because she's blowing up my notifications with 12 different texts about how I should start eating more kale or how I should be looking into buying real estate. Typical mom stuff, right? So, the other day, I'm lying in bed next to my girlfriend, and we've just finished, hanging out. Things are winding down, and we start sending each other some pretty spicy texts. It's nothing crazy, just a little bit of thinking about you and I wish you were here right now stuff, but the messages are definitely getting a bit more heated. We're sending some flirty messages back and forth, and in one of them, I get a little carried away. I decide to send a goodnight text that's definitely meant for her. Here's where I messed up. I have a habit of texting my mom every night, just a quick goodnight, love you message. It's been a thing for years, and it's just become part of my routine. So, I finish the sexy text to my girlfriend and go to send my usual goodnight, love you to my mom. Simple enough, right? Well, here's the catch. I had already opened my mom's text thread earlier that night, and I forgot to lock my screen after I put my phone down. My girlfriend had been teasing me a bit, calling me naughty because of the texts I had been sending, and we were both laughing about it. So, without thinking, I tap out a message, I can't stop thinking about your expletive, and I hit send. Immediately, I realize what I've done, and for a split second, I think, okay, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe she won't care. But then, I hear the ding of my phone. I don't even have to check. I know exactly what's happened. I open the messages, and there it is, right at the top of my mom's thread. I can't stop thinking about your expletive. The room goes completely silent, and my stomach drops like I've just gone over a roller coaster's edge. I look at my phone, then look at my girlfriend, who is now staring at me with wide eyes. I freeze for a moment. The sheer panic setting in is like nothing I've ever felt before. I immediately grab my phone and begin typing frantically, trying to explain. No. Mom, this was meant for someone else. I'm so sorry. Please forget that. Please, for the love of God, forget that. And that's when it gets worse. My mom responds, in full caps lock, no less, what? What did you say? What did you mean? I am so confused right now. The thing is, my mom is not tech-savvy. She's the kind of person who takes a while to get the hang of texting abbreviations, so a message like that, sent at that time of night, probably has her spiraling into a complete mental breakdown. She's reading it as if I'm confessing to some scandalous, world-shattering crime. Her mind is racing through all the possible scenarios. Did I accidentally get involved with something inappropriate? Did I get in some kind of trouble? What could I possibly be talking about? As you can imagine, my mind is racing too. At this point, my girlfriend is also trying to process what's happening, and she's dying of laughter. But I can't laugh. This is the stuff of nightmares. I just need to fix it, so I keep typing and frantically trying to clarify. It was a mistake. I was texting my girlfriend, not you. It's all just a joke, I promise. But my mom, bless her heart, is now convinced that I'm trying to cover up something far worse than a silly text gone wrong. Don't lie to me, please. I'm your mother. You can't just send something like that. What's going on? Who are you texting? The panic is setting in. I can barely breathe. I'm frantically typing, trying to explain the situation, but she's not letting up. She starts to overthink everything, firing off message after message like she's trying to interrogate me over text. Meanwhile, I'm texting my girlfriend like a man possessed, telling her to keep quiet about it and that I'm going to have to call my mom. I don't know what else to do. I'm in too deep. This is a mess. Finally, after what feels like forever, I can't keep up with the back and forth texting anymore. I call my mom. It rings, and my heart is pounding in my chest. I think I'm about to be grounded, even though I'm a grown adult. My mom answers on the second ring. She's calm, but you can tell there's an edge to her voice. Hello? Mom, listen, this is going to sound bad, but I swear it's not what you think. I sent that message to you by mistake. I was texting my girlfriend, and I didn't realize it went to you. Please, please don't freak out. There's a long pause, and I'm sweating bullets at this point. My mom then says something that completely catches me off guard. Well, that's embarrassing. I feel like a weight has been lifted. Maybe she understands? Maybe I'm not in complete trouble? But then she adds, but honey, I just don't understand what that was all about. It's not funny. You should never text like that. It's inappropriate, and you should know better. I can't believe it. She's basically scolding me for having a private conversation with my girlfriend. It's awkward, but at least she's not threatening to cut me off or something. At the end of the conversation, I assure her I'll be more careful in the future, and I hang up. I look over at my girlfriend, who is still laughing. I can't even be mad at her because, let's be honest, this whole thing was hilarious. But it's also one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I don't think I'll ever text my mom again without double-checking the recipient, or without considering the possibility that my private conversations might be going to someone who does not need to see them. Now, every time I hear my phone ding, I have a mini heart attack. TLDR, sent a spicy text to my mom by mistake instead of my girlfriend. Panic ensued. My mom now thinks I'm having some kind of midlife crisis at 24. Never texting my mom the same way again. TIFU by taking my boss's advice about team-building exercises at work. I never expected my work life to take a drastic turn from doing just fine to oh my god, what did I do, in less than 48 hours. And all of it started with a simple team-building exercise that my boss insisted we all participate in. It was supposed to be fun. At least, that's what he said. Here's the backstory. I work in a mid-sized marketing firm where the mood is usually pretty laid back, but we've been dealing with a fair amount of tension lately. The company has had some internal shifts, and morale has been at an all-time low. Some of it is just general stress from deadlines, and some of it is the uncertainty of who's staying and who's going, given the looming budget cuts. So, when my boss, Steve, suggested a team-building exercise to lift everyone's spirits, it seemed harmless. In fact, we were all kind of desperate for some positivity. Steve, a well-meaning but sometimes misguided guy in his early 40s, thought it would be a great idea to take us all on a trust adventure for the day. This was his idea of team building, an all-day trip to the great outdoors where we'd participate in various activities meant to challenge us emotionally, physically, and, supposedly, spiritually. He said it would help us bond, and we'd come back feeling refreshed and ready to tackle whatever was thrown at us. As someone who's always been skeptical of these kinds of activities but still open-minded enough to try, I signed up. I had nothing to lose, right? The day started innocently enough. We all met at the office parking lot early in the morning, and Steve had rented a huge van to transport the team to the Trust Adventure location, which turned out to be a rustic camp near the mountains. I'd say it looked more like a place where people go to escape from society than a corporate retreat, but I figured Steve knew what he was doing. He was the boss, after all. We arrived, and the first thing I noticed was how remote the place was. There was a small cabin with a fire pit, some benches scattered around, and a couple of rows of tents for us to sleep in if we were staying overnight. There wasn't much else to see, no Wi-Fi, no cell service, no distractions. It was just us, the trees, and whatever Steve had planned. The first activity was something called the Trust Fall. Now, I'd heard of this before, but in my mind, it was something that only existed in cheesy team-building seminars. The concept is simple. You stand on a platform, close your eyes, and fall backward into the arms of your teammates who are supposed to catch you. It's designed to teach you trust and vulnerability. I was, of course, apprehensive. Trust falls in real life can be risky, but I thought, what the hell, it's just the first exercise, how bad could it be? Let me tell you, I wasn't prepared for how much my coworkers would not be ready to catch me. The first person to go was Karen, from accounting. She was nervous as hell but still managed to do it. She fell backward into the waiting arms of 3 coworkers, including Steve, who were supposed to catch her. It went off without a hitch, and everyone clapped, which made Karen breathe a sigh of relief. After that, it was my turn. Now, I've never been the most physically coordinated person, and the idea of falling backward onto a bunch of people I barely knew was making me sweat. But I trusted Steve's leadership, so I climbed up to the platform. I turned around, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. Then, I fell backward, and I fell hard. Somehow, in a perfect storm of miscommunication and poor coordination, I was caught by no one. Instead of the smooth, coordinated fall I was expecting, I felt the wind leave my body as I plummeted into the dirt. The impact was so hard, I thought I'd broken something. I sat up, dazed, and immediately looked at Steve for guidance. He was standing there, rubbing his neck and wincing. That, didn't go as planned, he said. Sorry, man. I was confused and humiliated, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I just nodded and tried to stand up, pretending I was fine. But internally, I was fuming. I don't know if it was Steve's lack of leadership or my coworkers' inability to properly catch me, but this was not a good start to the day. Things went downhill fast. The next activity was called the Survival Challenge, which, in theory, should have been about working together to build a shelter or find food. Instead, it turned into a chaotic scramble where the goal was to gather enough sticks, ropes, and random objects to build a structure that would withstand the elements. We were given no instructions, no context, just a pile of materials and a time limit. It was like something out of a reality show, but with none of the guidance or expertise you'd see on TV. Of course, my team, which included me, Steve, and a few others, failed miserably. We spent the first 45 minutes arguing about whether to use the long branches or the shorter ones, and by the time we had something vaguely resembling a structure, the instructor, who had been walking around watching everyone, came over and said we didn't meet the challenge's objective. The result? We all had to redo it, but this time, in pairs. In the end, it was clear that Steve had no idea what he was doing. No one was bonding. No one was having fun. People were just miserable, tired, and in pain from trying to perform ridiculous stunts and tasks. It got to the point where some people just started wandering off. By late afternoon, people were openly complaining about the lack of food, the poor organization, and how their backs hurt from being asked to carry way too much stuff. Finally, the last event, a group reflection, was supposed to be a moment where we all gathered around a campfire to share how we felt about the day. You'd think this would be a nice way to wind down, but in the end, it felt like a group therapy session no one wanted to be part of. As we sat around the fire, each person reluctantly shared their thoughts. Steve tried to spin it positively, saying we had learned a lot about teamwork, but the only thing anyone really learned was that they never wanted to go on a team-building exercise again. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, sore, and pretty fed up with Steve's leadership. What was supposed to be a fun, enriching experience turned into a disaster of mismanagement and failed expectations. When we got back to the office the next week, people were still talking about it. Some complained openly to HR. Some just avoided Steve altogether. But no one was happier, and certainly no one felt more bonded. I think what really killed me, though, was that Steve seemed to genuinely believe that the day had been a success. He kept sending out emails in the following days with motivational quotes about teamwork, trying to keep the vibe going. It felt like the entire thing was a poorly executed attempt at self-validation for him. I don't know if anyone actually learned anything meaningful, but I certainly learned one thing: never trust your boss when he recommends a trust-building activity ever again. That was the day I realized that not all team-building exercises are created equal. And, more importantly, some of them might just ruin your career. So, it all started with a simple promise I made to my mom. Every year for the past few years, my mom has asked me to help her clean out the attic. It's one of those tasks that gets put off until the last minute, mostly because it's a huge mess up there and we never really know where to start. But this time, I promised her I'd get it done, no excuses. I was feeling pretty good about the fact that I had actually committed to this. I even told my friends I'd be spending the day being productive instead of slacking off like usual. The attic is pretty much the storage space for everything my parents have accumulated over the years. Old furniture, boxes full of childhood memorabilia, random knickknacks from their travels. And then there's the other stuff that I've been too lazy to clean out over the years. You know, old textbooks, clothes I've outgrown, broken electronics, and a bunch of things I probably should have thrown away but never got around to. My mom always says that it's a treasure trove up there. So, the morning of the big attic cleaning day, I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed some garbage bags, and started hauling stuff down from the attic. I thought it would be easy, just a few hours of sorting through dusty boxes, tossing the unnecessary stuff, and maybe finding a few mementos along the way. I was wrong. So very wrong. I should have known that getting started would be the hardest part. After about 30 minutes of lugging boxes down and stacking them in the hallway, I found an old wooden chest tucked away in the corner of the attic. It was covered in cobwebs, but there was something about it that made me curious. I've seen it there for years, but I had never bothered to open it. It was one of those things that, in my mind, had always been Mom's thing, maybe something sentimental, something important. But today, I felt a strange compulsion to see what was inside. So, I opened it. The chest was full of old papers, some letters tied with ribbon, and some photos, but what caught my attention was an old-fashioned wooden box wrapped in a faded silk cloth. I wasn't sure why I felt drawn to it, but I pulled it out and set it on the floor. My curiosity was completely piqued now. I carefully unwrapped the silk cloth, revealing a small, intricately carved box with brass hinges. It looked like something straight out of a mystery novel or a pirate movie. It was beautiful. I don't know why, but I couldn't resist. I gently lifted the lid of the box, expecting to find something small and sentimental, maybe a piece of jewelry or an old heirloom. What I didn't expect was the weird little mechanical device inside. It wasn't a watch, it wasn't jewelry, it was a small, ornate contraption with gears and a glass dome that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, but it immediately felt wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was too peculiar, too out of place in the otherwise mundane collection of memories in the chest. I'd never seen my mom so much as mention anything like it, and I'd certainly never been told about some odd family heirloom. Now, let me be clear here, I'm not one for superstition or spooky stuff. I'm not the guy who believes in curses or strange powers. But this thing? It felt off. It just did. Still, I thought, whatever. It's probably an antique, maybe a quirky gift from some old relative. I shrugged off the weird feeling and placed the box back inside the chest. But then, out of nowhere, the thing started to move. It wasn't a loud or sudden movement, but the gears inside the box began to turn on their own, and the little glass dome began to glow faintly. My heart skipped a beat. I panicked and immediately slammed the box shut, thinking maybe it was some kind of automatic mechanism that activated when disturbed. But after I closed it, the glow didn't stop. The glow seemed to pulse, flickering from beneath the lid. My first instinct was to put the box back in the chest and just forget about it. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to mess with it for a few more minutes. I opened the box again. This time, the glowing was stronger. The gears inside clicked, and the dome seemed to shimmer with a strange energy. Suddenly, without warning, the room around me seemed to shift. It felt like the air got heavier, like everything slowed down, like time itself was warping. I could hear the faintest whirring noise coming from the box. Then, before I could even process what was happening, the attic door slammed shut. I froze. My heart was racing. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like the door was stuck in place. I felt trapped. I started to panic, banging on the door, but nothing was happening. I turned back to the box, which was now glowing so intensely that I had to squint to look at it. The gears inside were turning rapidly, almost like it was winding up for something. My mind was racing. What had I done? What was happening? I tried to think of every possible explanation. Maybe the box was some kind of weird clock? Maybe it was some sort of antique toy that I had activated by mistake? I couldn't explain the glowing or the way the room felt like it was shifting, but I tried to stay calm. And that's when the worst possible thing happened. The box opened on its own. The glowing grew so intense that it hurt my eyes. The air around me seemed to hum with energy. I could feel it in my bones, this overwhelming, electric force that was now filling the room. The box emitted a soft, low hum, and the gears continued to spin faster. Then, everything around me froze. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. The dust motes hanging in the air froze mid-motion. The walls seemed to bend inwards, and I could hear a strange whisper, like 1,000 voices calling out from a distance. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear and confusion. My mind was a jumble of panic and disbelief. I thought for a split second that I might have lost my mind, that maybe this whole thing was just a hallucination. But then, in a flash, the glow dimmed, the gears stopped turning, and the room returned to normal. The attic door creaked open. I didn't wait to question what had just happened. I bolted down the stairs, dropped the box back into the chest, and slammed the attic door shut behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. To this day, I haven't mentioned any of this to my mom. She hasn't asked about the attic either, and I'm afraid to bring it up. I'm not sure what I unleashed, but I have no intention of ever opening that box again. So yeah, that was my TIFU. I promised my mom I'd help clean out the attic, but instead, I accidentally unleashed something that I'll never fully understand. TLDR, I opened an old, mysterious box in my attic that caused time to warp and everything to freeze. I have no idea what happened, but I'm never going near it again. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.